Hey guys, Genesis chapter 12 for this week. And it's kind of funny. No sooner do we get introduced to Abram than he's being sent away. And I think it's easy to overlook this first verse 1, that go from your country and your kindred and your father's house and to the land I will show you. Right? It's so easy for us to overlook this, but it's actually a pretty big deal. In a time where there was no social security system, no welfare system, LinkedIn, social media, none of that stuff existed. It was a big deal for you to leave the place you were from and to go somewhere else. I mean, nobody else had the obligation to care for you. Nobody was going to look out for you or have any allegiance to you. It was really a big deal. This is a huge task that Abram is being asked to do by God. It's hard to leave when things are comfortable. When we fear the unknown, we don't like things that we can't anticipate, right? It's because we can't anticipate that outcome. There's this book called You're Not So Smart by David McRaney, and he says this. He says, we're driven by emotional needs to solve this tension. And so our brain defaults to the easiest, fastest, the least painful option, the comfort of what we know. And I think if we're honest, we're all like that, right? The reason why we don't change or are reluctant to take a step like Abram was asked to here and go is because we're uncomfortable with the outcome. It's comfortable where we're at. We don't know what we're going to be stepping into. And so it's hard to move. So how do we work against this? How can we have the faith that Abram had to be able to do it? It starts with being faithful in the ordinary and the everyday things. It happens by surrounding ourselves with godly people and faithful people who can be with us on a journey. It starts with being in God's word, being inspired by it, understanding God's direction for us through what he reveals in his word, by praying, but also by just simply being still and in his presence. One of the things that really strikes me about this section here in chapter 12 about Abram is that if you read it for the first time, you can have the assumption that this is the first time that God has spoken to Abram, that this is the first he's heard of God, and yet he's still willing to move. But the reality is not that. It's not the first time. We know that this culture is an oral culture. And so we know that Abram comes from the line of Shem. And so it's likely to assume that for generations, the people in this line have been telling the story of God, the story of his faithfulness, of his assurances and the promises that he makes to them, about everything from the flood, even before that. And so he has heard about God. He has heard about God's faithfulness. And so he knows God. He's in a relationship with him so that when God does finally speak to him and tell him to go, he's able to do so. How can we have the faith of Abram to move when God says to move? It's by starting to be faithful in the small things, right? As we do that, we build muscle that allows us to move when God comes calling for the bigger things. So have a great week, everybody. I'll put some questions here in the email that's attached for chapter 12, and we will see you guys on Friday. Take care.